the case of the control freak, or we started discussing the case of the control freak. And this is again a person who refuses help from any person, from anybody else. This person cannot bear to share the control of anything with other people. This was in contrast to the person who was mentioned before that. King Solomon is really contrasting these two groups of people. Number one, the first group that we discussed was the case of the person who is the over-idealist, the head in the clouds type of person who is so focused on what they hold to be true and right that they refuse to involve themselves in the conversation at all and are unable to affect change. They can't make any change because they have excluded themselves from the conversation entirely. And then over here we have the person who's the diametric opposite. That's the person who's thinks that change is only going to come from one place, and that's from me. I'm the only one who can affect change in any sense, any shape or form, and therefore everyone should just bow to me. Let me take care of everything, and refuses help from any person. So we said that two people are better than one in that case. A person has to work if that's natural to a person, which actually King Solomon seemingly admits to himself that he deals with this as you would expect the king of Israel to do, that he himself deals with this. So the way to combat that is to involve other people and to force yourself to deal with other people. And he actually brought us 3 advantages to somebody who works with others instead of taking full control themselves. All right, the first advantage is that it actually changes the nature of the work, that the actual workload lessens, right? As we say that, if one person can carry 50 pounds, another person can carry 50 pounds, together they can carry 150 pounds, even though mathematically it doesn't necessarily work out, but in reality, because they're relying on each other, they're able to help each other out. Secondly, was that in case something happens and something occurs, in case of crisis or anything like that, they're able to help each other out, give each other a foot up, and at least one of them will survive. That was kind of how he put it. Not promising that both of them will survive, but by them working together, one will be able to help the other, and eventually somebody will survive any sort of pitfall. And the third advantage was that they're actually going to be able to obtain a certain level of foresight, that they're going to be able to foresee crisis before it actually comes on, which we said is actually, first of all, a more heroic matter, but it's also a more difficult thing. It's one thing to be able to take care of crisis as it shows up, but to actually foresee it and avoid it, that's a whole nother science. And that's something that the highest advantage, so to speak, of working with other people is to be able to foresee a crisis before it occurs. Okay, and that's where we're going to be finishing up the discussion of this person today with the following 3 verses. That starts with verse number 12. So without any further ado, I will get started with verse number 12 here. I hope everyone could see it. I just highlighted it on the page. And King Solomon tells us like this. It's almost like he's almost going to be telling us a 4th advantage, but I think it's actually a little different than the other advantages. And so let's read it inside. It says, "V'im yitkafo ha'echad." If the one person is grabs, tokef means to grab or to seize control. Seize is probably a better word. So if the one seizes control, hashinayim ya'amdu negdo, the 2 will stand against him, or will stand against them. V'hachut hamashulash, however, a 3-part cord, a rope made of 3 strings, lo bimhira yinateh, does not quickly get snapped, does not quickly snap. Okay, so again, there's a couple new root words that we're finding over here. Number 1 is tokef, which means to seize control. And kind of the second one over here is yinateh, to snap. Okay, so we have two things going on in this verse. Let's read it together one more time. If the one seizes control, Hashanayim yamdu negdo, the two will stand against them. V'hachut hamshulash lovim heirayin atek. And the three-part rope, or the string made of three threads, lovim heirayin atek, does not quickly get snapped. Okay, this is a very famous verse. In throughout the words of the sages, the end of this verse, that hachut hamshulash lovim heirayin atek, that a string made of three threads does not snap quickly. This is a very common phrase in Judaism in general, taken from here, obviously. So we'll discuss that, but first let's discuss the first half of the verse. And again, he's saying that if the one seizes control, the two can stand against them. My understanding is over here that the one is the same the one that we've been talking about this entire time. And that is the one person who tries to go it alone, tries to take full control of everything all on their own, refuses the help of other people. So number one is, it's not impossible to control like that. It does happen. And that's kind of the first lesson that you're seeing over here is im yitkafo echad, that it can happen. The one can take control. We find it occasionally happening throughout history that one strong-willed person working on their own does have the ability to control the narrative, to control the world around them, which is sometimes fortunate, sometimes unfortunate. A strong ruler whose mind is in the right direction is often helpful. More often than not, the control freak is not constructive, and we already discussed that to be in that position of wanting full control, it's usually more destructive than constructive. However, it can happen. What do you do if that person takes control and it's a negative control? Well, that's where we have this following words of Hashanayim yamdu negdo. The fourth advantage, I guess you would call it, the fourth advantage of working with other people is that you're able to overtake the power of the one. Okay, this is a common theme in literature and in different forms of art. But you can have a group of underdogs or people who are not quite as powerful working together, and they are able to overtake the power of the one who seizes control all on their own. And then at the end of the day, it's the power of that comes behind unity, the force behind unity, which goes and actually is stronger than the power of the one strong person. So that's the first step of this verse. I see this as a little different than our other three advantages, because the other three advantages were unique to the people who work together. People work together, they are good for three reasons. They're better off for three reasons. This is actually pitting the two groups against each other. You've got group number one, which is the guy by himself, and you've got group number two, which is the unity of the sum of the multiple parts. And that is able to stand up against the one. So it's kind of, it's both commentary that King Solomon's giving us, is also advice. So if you find yourself in a case where you have one person who is taking control, seizing control through brute force, it is the power of the unity of even the smaller, less powerful groups to be able to join together to overcome that one person. Obviously, one and two, it's more of a parable than anything else. Often the one who's powerful, who seizes control, is not necessarily one; it's usually a group also. But you have the multiple groups against them. It doesn't necessarily have to be one crazy person, but it could be a group of control freaks or a party of control freaks or anything like that. Obviously, every side of every political debate will interpret this verse as their side, being in the right. So do with that what you will. But I think the idea is the same, that by joining together with others, by accepting the help of others, you do have a power against the powerful. Then you have this second half of this verse over here. Okay, and that is V'hachut hamshulash lovim heirayin atek, that a three-part string, or a string made of three threads, or a rope made of three strings, however you want to read it. Chut is literally a thread. So that's why I'm kind of going with, is string. My mistake. Three different terminologies. Chut is a string. So that's why I'm kind of going with string made out of threads as opposed to a rope made out of strings. So it doesn't say if it was a rope, what would be the word for rope? I'm not sure off the top of my head, but I don't think we would use chut. Chut is more, for example, a tailor is called a chayat, meaning a tailor is somebody who uses a string and uses it to, works with string. So that's a chayat. So chut is more a string than a rope. So again, even though you often see this translated as the three-ply cord, chut hamshulash is the three-ply cord, I think it's more perfect more correct to translate it as a string, a three-threaded string. So a three-threaded string does not quickly snap. First of all, just taking the sages take first, this is, as I said, there's a common theme in Judaism. We use this all the time. For example, the rabbis tell us that, at least for Jewish men, if you wear tefillin every day and you have a mezuzah on your door and you wear tzitzit, then you are less likely to commit sin, right? Just the fact that you're surrounding yourself with mitzvot, that's less likely to commit sin. We also find that there's, they also say that if a person is involved in Mikra, in learning the verses of the Tanakh, and they're also involved in Mishnah, in the discussion of the sages throughout the generations, the Mishnah and the Talmud, and a person also involves themselves in derech eretz, which means acting appropriately or acting civilized. So that also is a safeguard from sin or from falling off the wayside. Right? The combination of those three forces together guide a person away from sin. Similarly, we have this idea. Threes are, again, a basic tenet in Judaism. We have Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob being our three-ply cord, right? Or our three-threaded string, which does not quickly snap. So that's, from the sages' perspective, that's kind of this idea that things that come in threes are stronger, right? If you made just in the parable itself, if you made a string out of two threads, it would snap pretty quickly. Once you have three threads together, it has a much stronger, they work. Actually, if you think about it, now that I'm just off the top of my head, I'm thinking of this. I don't know, I can't say what the physics necessarily are of string, but I think part of it is that, at least part of it is that, I'm sorry, my mouse got knocked over. At least part of it is that the three strings are tugging against each other, and that it's sharing the weight on each string, kind of like again, I don't actually know whether this is the physics of it, but in my mind that kind of makes sense, that each string is tugging at the other string and they're sharing the burden together, which you wouldn't have with two strings in the same way. It would be too much to share. So in that sense, I think that's kind of the visual that we're getting, is that a string made of three parts is much stronger than even two parts. So until now, we've been talking about two, working with another person, and if you're cold, then they can warm each other up, and if they fall, they can lift each other. One can lift up the other. But so here we're talking about adding a third person to that dynamic, and it changes the entire thing. It's an entirely new paradigm of connection. I think that there's a interesting idea over here. We know, so as Americans, let's say, we have a three-part government, and the idea is that we have a checks and balances system, whether that works or not, right? But we have a three-part government where we have an executive, a legislative, and a judicial branch, which are supposed to be working against each other. It's supposed to be creating a sort of gridlock and stopping government from growing out of control. In that sense, you again have this idea that with the threes, they're able to keep each other in check much better, right? When you just have two, it doesn't quite do the same. So, for example, think of a two-party system in America. Each party does have a little bit of a check on the other one, but it doesn't stop the other party from flying off the handle, right? You do have still, it's just a dialectic. You just have A versus B, or as many will see it, good versus bad. Once you have a third party in there, it starts to question that dynamic and say, maybe it's not bad or good, maybe it's this direction, this direction. There's a third way of looking at it also. I was actually, on a personal note, when I was about 11 or 12 years old, my father of blessed memory, took myself and my brother to I grew up in Denver, Colorado. So he drove us over to Las Vegas, Nevada, and we got to we went to a concert by the Blue Man Group. I don't know if anyone here has seen the Blue Man Group, but they're a performance art music group. They paint themselves entirely in blue grease paint, and they wear bald caps. So they have a very funky look to them, and they play interesting homemade instruments, PVC piping, and all sorts of things. It's actually really fun, really fascinating. And part of their shtick is that they don't talk. Everything is done through music and through motion and through hands, through facial, through their nonverbal communication, basically. But I remember I tried to find it before the class, but I wasn't able to find it anywhere. But I remember seeing an interview with them, with the founders of it, years ago. And they say that on stage at any time, there's only three performers on stage at any time. And the reason for that, this is a fascinating reason. They said, when you have two people, two people are able to establish a norm. And once you have a third person, that's when you can establish an abnorm. You have establish what's abnormal. You could change the conversation. So it takes two groups to create communication, to create a cross communication, let's say, to talk to each other. It takes a third person to come in and change that, to change the norm and completely shift the dynamic. So in that sense, when establishing an organization or establishing some sort of group that's focused on growth, to have just two people, hitting ideas off of each other, it is very helpful. We've already seen it. We've established that there's at least 4 advantages to that than working on your own. But once they're still in a situation where they may just be talking to each other, they may be talking the same language, they may not be seeing the larger picture. Once you add in the third person or the third group, then suddenly it can change the entire dynamic and create something that's much more constructive. Now, is it more productive? I don't know. Sometimes the more people you add, less productive you are, but it's constructive. I want to differentiate between those two things. You're more likely to have somebody question what everyone else is considering to be right and true and normal, and somebody saying, wait a second, maybe we should rethink this. So I think that's part of the idea over here. Does it say it's going to be perfect? No, it doesn't say a 3-part string, a string made of 3 pieces of twine, 3 threads. I'm sorry, a string made of 3 threads is never going to break. It says it won't quickly break, right? So of course it could still happen. You could, even with 3 people, they could all be just yes manning each other and agreeing with what each other says. That's possible, but in reality, once you have 3 people, it's more likely, I would say, for them to actually question what their assumptions and rethink ideas. So that is 2 parts of this verse over here. Again, that number 1 is if the person who's working all by himself, the control freak, does seize control, it's the power of the masses, the power of 2 to work and stand against them, and that's an amazing ability that they have. The second thing is, if you want even better than 2 people, is try 3. Try a string made of 3 threads, because that's going to change your entire dynamic. It's going to help you question those norms. So that's what I think is over here, and obviously it cuts down on corruption in many cases, etc. So we are going to move on to the next verse number 13. And now he's finishing off the idea of this second group of people, the control freaks. So just like he did, we saw a couple verses ago, verse 6, that after discussing the case of the idealist, King Solomon gave us what's the better option. He said tov, right? In that case, it was tov. It was better to have one handful of the production of one handful, and it comes with with pleasant work, as opposed to two hands full of work that doesn't match a person, it doesn't work with a person's personality. So over here also he ends off the discussion with a tov. Instead of what we've been seeing, the control freak, let's look at a whole different case. Okay, so here also he starts off with saying tov, better or good, is, and he's going to give us an example. What is good? Tov yeled miskein v'chacham. Better is a child, a poor child, a poor wise child. Okay, yeled is child, miskein is poor, literally, does not have, destitute, and chacham and wise. That is better, mimelech zakein uchsil, from a king who is old, aged, and foolish. So again, better, tov yeled miskein v'chacham, better is the child who is poor but wise, mimelech zakein uchsil, from an old, foolish king. Asher lo yada lihizaher od, who does not know to be warned anymore. Okay, warned as in WARN, and right, to warn somebody, to tell someone to beware. Okay, that's the word I'm going for. It's hard to get on the Zoom. So again, let me read the verse again as one. Tov yeled miskein v'chacham. It is better a child who is poor and wise, mimelech zakein uchsil, than the king who is old and foolish. Asher lo yadali, he's a hair od, who no longer knows what it means to be forewarned, to be told to beware. Okay, zahar, zihirut means care, to take care of in something, to be careful with what you do. So that's why the word over here does not know to accept warning anymore. Okay, so there's kind of this three senses that you get over here. You have the child, who is poor but wise. So again, we have this, and the converse of that is the old foolish king, right? He seems to switch the order over here. I'm not sure exactly why. Child usually I would assume, would correspond to an old person. A miskein, a poor, downtrodden person, would correspond to the king, and wise would correspond to the fool. I think what he's telling us over here is that there's three ways to measure a person: that's age, status, and wisdom. Okay, and in this case, even if a person is or in fact, I would say actually, he's saying preferable that your leader. Who should your leader be? A child, a poor child, but a wise poor child. Okay, better that than a king, meaning somebody born into it who is old and foolish. Okay, somebody who's a child, somebody who's young, hopefully, is open to wisdom, is open to hearing what people have to say to them. They're still able to accept what's being told to them, as opposed to other people as they get older. Often, as we get older and older, we start to be less and less inclined to listen to what people tell us to do. One of the rabbis in Seattle once told me that when I used to live there, he said that he was having trouble with one of the community members, and he received advice from one of his advisors, who said, once a person's over a certain age, don't expect them to change. Learn how to deal with them, but don't expect them to change. So a yeled in this case with a child, that's somebody who's still impressionable. So that is what you're looking for in a leader. Not necessarily that they shouldn't have any power, they shouldn't have any control over the situation, but they should still be open to hearing what people have to say. And same thing with somebody who's poor, somebody who knows what it means to be on the receiving end of things, and who's needs to be on the receiving end of things. That person is also going to have a certain level of impressionability, which is what we're looking for in a leader. We don't want the control freak. We want the person better than the control freak, than the old foolish king who's born into it, who's too old to hear any rebuke, and who's too foolish, who's too, as we said, conceal. This idea of the fool is that they're so covered in their ideas that they can't, nothing could penetrate anymore. So better is to have a child who's poor but wise. Wisdom is kind of the qualifier over here. That obviously a poor child, you shouldn't just vote poor children into your control, into your systems of government necessarily. But wise, that's the key factor over there. And if he's wise, if that poor child is wise, that's definitely going to be better than your old foolish king. What's wrong with the old foolish king? That's the end of the verse over here. Asher lo yadali, he's a hero who does not have the ability, doesn't even know what it means to accept warning, to accept, to be told to beware. He's unable to take that anymore. Just one second. So again, that's the main kicker over here. That's our big problem. That it's better to be to be impressionable. It's better to still accept wisdom from those around you. And I'm assuming that the child, this poor child, is going to be willing to accept wisdom from the elderly, from those around, those who have life experience. That's part of being a chacham, part of being a wise person. Right? We have the chacham coming up in a week and a half. The chacham by the Pesach Seder, right? By the Passover Seder, he is the one who asks questions and who asks, what are all the rules? What should I know? What should I be? Where should I go? What should I do? That is a wise person. So that's probably what we mean when we say the wise child, as opposed to, again, the old foolish king cannot take any warning anymore. Now, we're going to be stuck with, so a child who's poor, just because they're wise, that's good enough. That's enough for us to immediately say this is the type of person who should be in control. We still want probably some more qualifiers, and that's our verse 14 over here. I'm sorry, I'm going through it rather quickly, but the two verses kind of have to be read together, because this is he's filling in the plot. Who is this young, poor child, wise child, who's overtaking the reins from the Melech Zakenu Chsil, from the old foolish king? He says, well, Ki Beit Hasurim Yatsa Limlo. This child is coming from the jail, from the other side of the tracks. Literally, it means the place where people are held in captivity, the house of captivity, or the house of bondage, whatever you want to call it. So he goes from the house of bondage, from the house of captivity, Yatsalim Loch, he goes out to rule. Kigam b'malchuto nolad Rosh, because he was born into kingship, this poor person. Okay, again, the words is doing a poetic syntax over here. So again, Kimi Beit Hasrim Yatsalim Loch, from the house of captivity, he goes out to rule. Kigam b'malchuto nolad Rosh, and even in his kingship, he was born when he was poor. Okay, again, that's that strange syntax over there, that poetic syntax, meaning even when he was poor, even in his lowly stature, he was born to greatness. So what we're talking about over here is, again, we're kind of filling in the plot of our proverbial young, poor, wise child. This is somebody who shows two traits over here. I'm kind of reading the verse over here as two separate traits. Number one is that they are able to leave their original place. They're able to take what they have with them, but they're able to leave it and accept a new role into kingship. It's not somebody who just stays as a poor young child. It's somebody who takes those things that they learned as a poor young child, that impressionability, that ability to accept what other people tell them, and they're able to take that into their kingship with them. Not only that, the second piece is that they, even when they were born as in poverty, nolad Rosh, they were born into poverty, they conduct themselves with a level of kingship, meaning to say that they show promise in both situations. It's kind of a carry what you were born with, but also evolve into something new. We have these two things going on. So it's not the idea to just stay as a young, poor child who happens to be wise. It's to take the ideas that for this child to take those ideas and to grow with them, and to use that in their next role as a king, which they're already prepping themselves for in their youthful state. So that's really what we're kind of going to be going with. The idea again is, what's better than the control freak is the person who, even if they have to rule all by themselves, they're willing to accept what other people have to tell them. They're willing to take on the advice of other people and work together with other people. We're actually going to, in the coming verses, we're going to kind of continue with this subplot of this child who goes out to become king. We're going to see what happens in the following generations. Once we have a parable, we like to work with it and stretch it as far as we can. So we're going to be doing that till about the end of the chapter. I don't want to go any overtime tonight. So thank you all for joining us. I'm going to stop the share right now, take us back to the main page. Thank you all for joining us. I hope to see you back here next week. Again, keep your eyes peeled for our time next week. It just might be, I'm not sure exactly what time. I have to contemplate on that a little bit, figure out what time we should do the class next week. And I also hope to continue this also over Passover. The first day of Chol HaMoed is a Monday. So I hope to continue this over Passover. But again, keep your eyes open for any updates on that. Thank you all for